Let's talk brand names. Of course, the brand name is the pronounceable words used to identify a brand. There are other aspects of a brand name and a brand that are important to understand. One is the trademark. A trademark encompasses any recognizable signs, such as a word, a phrase, a logo, or a symbol that identifies and distinguishes the source of a good and service in the marketplace. It serves as a guarantee for the customer of quality, ensuring that consumers associate specific attributes and characteristics with a specific brand. The brand mark is a symbol, mark, or image representing the brand that helps identify the specific company. Brand marks typically visually convey our company's um, message and image by stripping away any letters or words and text from any of the logos. And then there, of course, is trade dress. Trade dress is the overall commercial image, look, and feel of a product or service that indicates or identifies the source of the product or service and distinguishes it from those of others. Trade dress can consist of such elements as size, fonts, shape, color, texture, atmosphere, decor, um, or any of the other aspects of a brand that is visual to the potential consumer. Of course, with brand names, it's important to find a good name. Yes, names are important. The power of a good name as opposed to a bad name can substantially impact positively or negatively a particular brand offering. You need a name that helps position the product, that is, helps sell the product, and that it infers unique selling propositions or gives some sort of a sense of the brand in another way to the consumer. An example, of course, of a couple of brand names here is Healthy Choice Frozen Foods, which suggests that these particular frozen foods are healthy alternatives that are frozen as opposed to the other alternatives that are frozen and being offered. Another example is the Land Cruiser. That, of course, is the name of a Toyota SUV. And of course, it suggests what? That this is a vehicle that can cruise on any land and get through any area. And of course, the idea behind these two names is that they help position the particular brand. You don't want a bad name. Here's an example of a bad name. Not very long ago, Chrysler introduced a full-size rear-wheel drive automobile, and they called it the Chrysler 300. Now, why is Chrysler 300 a bad name? Well, the Chrysler 300 suggests what? Well, 300. Well, what does 300 mean? It's obviously a Chrysler, but what does the 300 mean? As you might know, if you drive a BMW or you drive some of the other vehicles that have numbers on the Mercedes, a lot of high-end automobiles use numbers as part of their names. Those numbers all reflect something: the size of the motor, the length of the body style of the car, or the length of the automobile, or something like that. The Chrysler 300 doesn't really do any of that. And so when Chrysler was asked why they decided to name it the Chrysler 300, they said that, well, in the 1950s, late 1950s, when they quit selling full-size Chrysler rear-wheel drive automobiles, the last one that they sold was the Chrysler 290. So it seemed like the next one that they would produce and sell should be called the Chrysler 300. A cute story, but still doesn't really help save that name. When doesn't a name matter? Well, the name always matters, folks. The name always matters. Sometimes we use names that we think are cute, or we have names that have personal value to us, or we have names that we just like the sound of. But names do matter. Some examples of names that we see once in a while, we'll see opposite names. Soy butter or light beer, all right, or jumbo shrimp, those kinds of names. Um, Sometimes those names work, sometimes they don't. I think you want to be clever. I think you want to be careful when you're using clever opposite names to make sure that there is no potential backlash. Some other examples of bad names. Some examples of bad names. How about these? Elmer, Hubert, Agnes, Bernice, Eastern Airlines, Southwest Airlines, America West Airlines. Why are these all bad names? Well, the first couple of names in here are old names of perhaps your grandparents or your grandparents' grandparents. Um, One of the benefits of using the name Elmer is that no matter what language you transfer the name Elmer into, translate it into, it always comes out Elmer. The problem with these airlines is that Eastern Airlines suggests that it only flies in the eastern part of a country or the eastern part of the hemisphere or whatever. Southwest Airlines, the same problem. America West Airlines, the same problem. You really want names that are adaptable and provide some level of meaning about the benefits sought. Another example of bad names, almost any hyphenated name is probably not going to be any good. How about the name Continental? Is that a good name for an airline? Well, one of the problems with the name Continental is that it has a global sort of feel to it, but it is non-distinguishable. Anything could be Continental. Same thing for something like Acme. How about the name ConAgra? ConAgra is the name that is used for a particular brand of consumer products made by a company, and of course that it is a shortened. It's a name that was shortened from Consolidated Agriculture, and they shortened it to ConAgra. I know you're thinking you must be kidding. Another thing that we try not to put on many brand names are things like the word diet. It has it's sort of a negative connotation to it, and so we use what? Sugar free, zero sugar. We might use light or something, but we tend not to want to use the word diet. Another example is what we call the no name trap. The no name trap is when we use letters instead of names. RCA. How about the university, MSU? What university does that stand for, MSU? Missouri State University? Michigan State University? Memphis State University? Mississippi State University? Montana State University? Do not substitute initials for names. UNLV, often then changed to Vegas. Brand names that are too long will always be shortened. Examples of that are things like Los Angeles, LA, Chicago, Chi-Town, San Francisco, Frisco or San Fran, Las Vegas, Vegas. And then, of course, all of the TV networks. Continental Broadcasting Service, the American Broadcasting Company, the National Broadcasting Company, and then, of course, ESPN. And it is hard to understand what ESPN might actually stand for. Another type of brand names that are potentially problematic are the free ride trap brand names. Okay, free ride trap brand names is when we try to use a current brand name and extend it. Back in the old days, there used to be a very famous SUV called the Bronco. And they decided to make a smaller version of the Bronco, and they called it the Bronco 2. And of course, it should have had its own name because the Bronco 2 was not a good name because it was confusing, it was detrimental to the original Bronco, and on and on and on. How about Alka-Seltzer Plus? There's Alka-Seltzer. What's Alka-Seltzer Plus? Who knows? There used to be a famous hotel chain called the Holiday Inn hotel chain. Well, probably it didn't make any sense to call it the Holiday Inn Express. It probably should have came up with a non-free ride trap name. The bottom line, brand names need to be available. You don't want to go end up going to court by using a name that is not available. One of those examples for that is that when Steve Wynn got ready to open the Mirage Resort and Casino, it turns out that on Flamingo Road near the university was a little bitty one-story motor inn called the El Mirage. And the El Mirage, at the last minute, after it went on and on and on for quite a while, decided to sue the Mirage for a name infringement. And the Mirage ended up paying a substantial amount of money to be able to use the Mirage name. Now, the good news for the El Mirage was that it turned out that for the El Mirage, this was also a good deal. The owners made so much money on the name that they were able to close the hotel down and level it and turn it into a parking lot. So we want names that are available so we don't get sued over using someone's name. Initials aren't names. No-name names are useless. The best names are locked directly into the product's benefits, or at least it tied into the product's positioning. Make sure that the name is pleasing to the ear and sight. Hopefully make it easy to remember. How do we make a name easy to remember? Well, there are lots of things that we can do, right? Rhyming. We can have all of the first. If it's a multiple word brand name, we can make sure that all the words start with the same letter. All those sorts of things that make it easy to remember. It ought to be unique enough to remember, but it ought to be common enough that it is easy to identify on site. Coined names or computerized names need special care. An example is Zima and Acura. Zima was part of a particular malt liquor brand, and they had this Zima campaign where they took a whole bunch of words that started with S and they substituted Z. Zima Zizzles, that kind of stuff. And then, of course, immediately after they did that, when it came out, people said stuff like Zima Zucks. And so be careful when you're using coined names. I think that they can potentially backfire in a great big hurry. How about Acura? Acura is an interesting computer-generated name. It sounds like what? Like precision engineering or something, doesn't it? It's kind of interesting. The Acura brand name. Perhaps that one has maybe worked better. Always think multilingual. Make sure that no matter what language the name is translated into, it's acceptable. Be careful about any existing meanings, negative connotations, and pronounceability. Of course, probably the most famous of all examples is the famous Chevrolet automobile that was called the Nova. And of course, if you've had one semester of Spanish someplace, you know that Nova is probably not the name that you want for a car. By the way, another example of that is the Kia. Right? Kia, the initials Kia, K-I-A, has a particular meaning in English for soldiers. KIA means killed in action. That's also not a great name for an automobile. Maybe it doesn't kill the brand, but it certainly doesn't help it. Getting around a bad name. So your product has a bad name. What do? You could replace it. You could resurrect an old name. In many cases, it's a name that has been around for a long time, is now in the public domain. You can do some sort of sub-branding. Or you might try some sneaky name like McDowell's, but you also want to be very careful there when the lawsuits start flying. Another option would be to use your brand name and help it to create and name a new category. Like SUV, sport utility vehicle. People say, oh, the Jeep was the first SUV. No, Jeeps were not SUVs. Jeeps were APVs, all-purpose vehicles. The benefit of naming a category as yours is that maybe you can own your own category. Another option would be make an enemy. That is someone to position against. Be careful about negative generic categorizations like urban. Find a new generic. Look at the facts and see if you can come up with a brand name that might, in fact, become legendary.